Hi everyone, it's Lisa. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome to my sewing lair. I'm glad to be in my lair. We had a little bit of a Gilligan's Island 3-hour tour extravaganza or adventure yesterday on the river. First time in however many years we've been boating, which is probably like 4 decades or more. We had to be towed in, but luckily the nearest boat landing was not very far away from where we broke down, and we were able to Uber to our vehicle and trailer from where we put in and got to pull out. So all ended well, but it was quite an adventure. So I'm back in my lair, safe and sound, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the quilt that you see on the wall. My quilt is a Kaleidoscope quilt. It's a traditional Kaleidoscope block. It has just 2 colors in it. I have a white background, and it's also part of my Swedish Death Quilting because I have this fabric from Marcus Fabrics, which is called All Around Town, and it's in black and royal blue and white, and I just paired it with a white background. The Kaleidoscope block creates, as you can see, this lovely undulating pattern. There's no curved piecing in it, but rather it relies on the acute angles in the interior angles and the corner setting triangles of the quilt. These quilts can be made very elaborately by further compounding the interior angles, and Adita Sitar's Alaska quilt is a great example of that. But this quilt was just very simple. It's 2 colors. I didn't have to do any thinking. I just needed to make sure that my blocks finished at 6 inches, meaning they needed to trim at 6.5. And that seems simple enough, but it really may not be unless you refine your construction techniques, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. I also have this as part of my design as you go. I decided to frame this quilt with diamond rectangles. A diamond rectangle is basically 2 peaky and spike blocks together, but I prefer the look of the full block, and I use Deb Tucker's Diamond Rex ruler to do this. And I continued the inverse positive and negative theme through this with my diamond rectangles, and I'm really very happy with it. And the backing of it, I have this batik fabric that I bought way back when, like right before COVID or during COVID, and I paid, I think, $2.99 a yard. I'm pretty sure this was $2.99 a yard, and I got it at Hancock's of Paducah. So I plan on using this for the back. But this size quilt may seem like it's probably too big for a baby. You could maybe use it for a toddler, but I'm going to use it for myself because I used a small quilt that I had made, and I took it on the boat. And what's nice about it is that, it was big enough for me and my dog to sit on, and when you put it down in the sand, it doesn't collect sand like anything like a terry towel or something does. So it really, and it's a lot lighter weight. So I really enjoyed using that on the boat, and I think that I am going to make this a boat quilt or a quilt that I sit in the yard with or something like that. So anyway, it's going to be my quilt because I like it so well. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the construction techniques on a Kaleidoscope block. If you are doing one and maybe have not had good luck with it. And I'm just going to give you a couple of tips from what I found out from my reacquaintance with this block. Here's one of my test blocks, and it has a couple of different construction techniques. And let's take an overall look at the block. First off, a perfect kaleidoscope block will have a perfect join in the middle, and it will have 1/4 inch leeway on each of these points. And when you construct it, it will press out and trim out to be your cut size. In this particular case, that would be 6.5 inches. This is a 6-inch finished block. And you would want it to lay flat. As I was undertaking my construction techniques, there's some variations. One variation is, well, let me take a step back and understand that if you're just using a 2-color construction, as I've done here and as I did on the quilt that was on my design board, this block will always have the same pairs together. Always. They're all together. All that's changing is your corner piece. So in this particular rendition, I have a light colored corner setting triangle against a dark. And if I were choosing the obverse or inverse block, I would have the dark on the light. That's the only 2 variations that you would be using. And you can see that here, dark to light, light to dark. And when you fashion this, one set of instructions I had showed attaching the corner setting triangle to the interior angle and then pairing it with its mate. I didn't like that construction technique, and I opted for the alternative, which is piecing all of this together and then adding the corner setting triangle, and I slightly oversized it, and I'm going to tell you why I did that. These interior pieces were cut true. I did not cut them oversized. Now, Deb Tucker has a ruler and a method where you're actually oversizing these, but I had good luck cutting these true but oversizing my corner setting triangles. You can see that this isn't a great join in the middle, and this is a test block. So again, your test blocks are expected to be kind of perverted in a way because you're refining your construction techniques. So let's look at this particular block here. And you can see I don't have, it finishes the way it is, but it's a little lumpy and bumpy, but I do have a really nice join. Let's look at the back of the block here. You can see one way to get a flat center is by doing 2 things. By spinning your seams, that means each time you join a pair, you press it the same way. So for me, I'm always pressing to the left. I do my Lemoyne stars that way too. You can press to the right if you prefer, just do all of your blocks that way. The second thing is sewing these with a scant 1/4 inch, and that will help you because you have basically 8 seams here and there's a confluence in the center. And the other thing to do is to stop sewing a 1/4 inch before you get to the end. And here's the reason for that. And it depends on what kind of ruler you cut with. If you're cutting with a ruler with a blunt tip, as this is, then you will want to stop a 1/4 inch. If you're cutting with a ruler that is a acute tip, you don't need to do that because you're not going to, you can split that a lot easier. And like, for example, a 45-degree diamond works very well that way too if it has a very acute tip. So I typically sew off on those. I did not sew off on this blunt tip. And as you can see, I have a really nice flat join. This block, it's not starched, but it lays flat and it finishes mostly where I want it to be. If you do not oversize your corners, again, you're sewing on a bias here, and this is another thing I want to tell you. to get these 1/4 inch, you must sew this with a full 1/4 inch seam. So that's why it's best to oversize this by about 1/4 of an inch. And then when you trim it down, after you've pressed it and trimmed it down, it's going to finish exactly. You don't need to worry about how much your thread or fabric is taking up, because you're going to account for that in the fact that you've oversized it and are going to trim it true to size. So again, the construction methods are joining the corner setting triangles after you sew everything together, joining the corner setting triangles before you join your pairs together, and I really don't recommend that. I didn't find that it worked well for me. Having a consistent way of spinning your seams, and if you like to press your seams open, you can certainly do that. I'm too lazy to do that. And using a scant 1/4 inch for each of these, because you end up with 8 seams. It ends up taking up a lot of space. Now, the other thing that's important, you're using positive and negative blocks. So let's say this is a positive block when you've got more dark than light, and this is a negative block where you have more light than dark. For if you always press your corners towards the dark fabric, when it joins to its mate, so this would be, which it isn't because this was a test block, this would need to be pressed towards the interior. This is pressed toward the exterior. And then what happens when you join these, you end up with a nice nesting of your seams. Now, you might find this piece here to be more of a confluence than you like. I haven't had a problem with it, but again, you would want to press your seams open if that is a problem for you. So those are my tips to do that. I have actually 2 Kaleidoscope rulers. I have Marty Michelle's ruler, which is really quite nice, and I also have Deb Tucker's ruler, which I'm not sure what I've done with. Oh, yeah. I have her Wedge Star ruler, and you can do a lot of things with the Wedge Star ruler, and you can see that her ruler has a very acute tip, and I think I still stopped sewing 1/4 of an inch. And what her ruler does, it oversizes everything, and then you're coming back through, and then you're making, you're finding the midpoint and finding the trims. But I found that using the construction techniques that I outlined, I did not need to oversize these pieces. But frankly, I had to do several test blocks in order to achieve my perfect-ish results. The other thing I want to suggest to you is that, I don't know if you can see this, but I sew with Wonderfill 80 weight cottonized polyester thread. It does not stretch. Your heat from your iron will not melt it, but you wouldn't want to use it on anything that you're putting in the microwave, or if you're making a hot pad, you would want to use 100% cotton. But what I found with the 80 weight thread is that it doesn't take up very much room in my seams. And it's called Deco Bob. And I typically sew with just one color, which is light gray. Now, I want to tell you, this is a black fabric. You cannot see that seam. You can see it a little bit there, but that's because I'm pulling the bejeebers out of it. But it is not noticeable whatsoever. So if you're looking for an all-round thread, and if you want to try to jump over the myths and maybe some bad information, in my view, about the ills of polyester thread, buy a small spool and try piecing with it. I've been piecing with it for over a year now, and I started out with Aurifil, which I love. This isn't a knock against anything, but I found that the Deco Bob gives me the strength that I want, and is pretty easy to work with. I call it, it's fine as frog hair, and that is true, to be sure. Oh, and while I'm at it, for any of you guys thinking about getting one of these dark mats, I love the mat. I love the markings on it, but frankly, it's really hard to see markings on rulers if you're working with a dark fabric on this dark background. So that's just a little non-pro tip, if you will. So that's why I have my Olfa rotating mat out, so it's a little easier to see and true up my blocks. So you can see that you don't need to do a lot of thinking to end up with quite a nice little quilt. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope that you're working on something that gives you joy, and check back with me later and see what's on the design board. Bye.